we are making these. So these are combining our love of laser cutting and also a different media. We're going to use some embroidery floss. And so it's kind of like embroidery, but much easier and on wood. So instead of using a canvas, we're using wood, and you can see that we have holes cut out of all of these to make a pattern. And then we're going to learn two very easy stitches, which you can get more complicated and you can do fancier stitches if you would like, but because we try to teach beginner things to get you started and maybe a love of something else, these are just two very easy stitches. So let's see what's in our box. So right away you'll see that you have some instructions. And there are 3 pages here. The first page is just my write-up of how you are going to do this kit. The second page gives a little bit more detail on your first stitch and how you secure your thread, which we'll go over in the video. And the third page is 4 different stitches that you can do on these embroidery wheels. Now, of course, you can do any kind of embroidery stitch that you want to do. You can look up stitches on the internet and do something fancy if you want, or maybe you're pretty skilled in embroidery already, and in that case you can definitely use your knowledge there. But to get us started, we're just going to do 2 different stitches. So we are going to use the back stitch, which is the first stitch on your sheet, and we're going to do the French knot, which is the last one. Then we included just a couple of other stitches that you can do if you would like, but once again, feel free to get as fancy as you would like. Also in our box is a bunch of embroidery threads. Now this is my box, my demo box, so it's a little messy, but yours are all in the skeins. You'll get 6 different colors, and we tried to pick colors that went together for each of your kits. If you happen to not like the colors that you got in your kit though, you can go to Walmart or any of the other big box craft stores and you can buy yourself some of these skeins. They are only, I think they're like 33 cents each, or maybe you have some left over from other projects. You'll get 2 easels in your box, 2 mini easels, and we'll show you later how those go together. In my box, I only have the one, just for demonstration purposes. You'll have a tiny little paint pod of brown paint. You'll have a sealed bag. Mine is no longer sealed, but it is a sealed bag with your needle and your needle threader. Your needle is stuck into cardboard, so you don't accidentally poke yourself as you are unpacking your box. You'll have a baby wipe in a bag. And then of course you'll have your 2 laser cut discs. One is just a floral disc and one has your initial on it. All right, so for the video time purposes, I'm only going to do 1 disc. I'm going to do the floral disc because it's the easiest one to do right away. Now the initial is not hard to do, so don't misunderstand. The initial is not hard. It is just a little bit more time consuming maybe because of the initial, okay? But definitely it's still the same stitch. You're still just gonna do a back stitch on the initial. So it is not hard. All right, so let's get started. Now you can leave these just natural wood if you would like. All right, let me show you now. This is my sample that I did first. This is natural wood. I did not do anything to the surface of this. But we also included a little paint pod of brown paint and a baby wipe, so you can do the stain method if you would like. So let me just show you how we are going to stain this. We are going to take our baby wipe out of the plastic bag, and I'm just going to fold it in half, and then I'm just going to wrap that half around, just 1 finger for this because we've got to dip into that paint pot. And then I'm just going to dip my finger into that paint pot and grab some paint. And then I am going to just wipe it onto the surface of my disc in a very thin coat and just moving my paint all around. Now, if you get globs of paint inside those holes, you're gonna wanna make sure that you poke them out using a toothpick or a needle or a very sharp pair of medical tweezers like we use in the studio, or you can use a scribe if you have a scribe. You can get scribes at the dollar store if you have a Dollar Tree by you. I think they come 2 to a pack, and they're usually, they've got a pink handle and just a very small needle tip on them. Okay, so that's all we are going to do for this. Just get a little bit of stain look to this guy, and that is done. All right, now you can also stain your easels if you would like. So same method, you're just gonna swipe the paint onto your easel. Or yeah, it's paint to make it look stained. But on your easels, you're gonna wanna make sure that you do both sides. And then to build your easel, you're just going to take 2 of the opposite pieces. Remember, you'll have 2 sets of easels in your box, but one has to have the notch cut out of the top and one has to have the notch cut out of the bottom. And then you're just going to fit those 2 pieces together like this. And there you have your easel. Okay. All right, we're gonna set that aside and we're gonna get going. Next, you're gonna wanna open your needle and your threader and pull your needle out of the cardboard. And I'm going to start with the stems. I think starting with the stem is the easiest thing to do, but there is no right or wrong spot to start on this. You can start wherever you want. You can start with whatever color you want. Maybe you wanna work in order of colors. I'm not sure. Whatever you want to do is totally up to you. Okay, so we have to thread our needle, and for some of you, you may not even need a needle threader, but my eyes are old and I definitely need a needle threader. So all you're going to do is you're going to take this threader, and you can see that it has like a wire diamond shape, right? So you're going to take the tip of this and you're going to push it through the eye of the needle. And sometimes with old eyes, even that part's hard. All right, so we're gonna push that through the tip of the needle, the eye of the needle, and then we're gonna take our embroidery floss or embroidery thread, and we're gonna push that through the opening in that diamond of the threader. And then we're just gonna leave just a small little tail, about 3 inches right there. And then we're gonna pull the needle off of that threader. Now, you'll have to work it just a little tiny bit, because with 2 strands of embroidery floss and pulling that little metal of the threader out, gets kind of stuck on that eye. All right, now you can see I have about a 6-inch tail on my embroidery floss, and I'm gonna wanna keep that so I don't lose my thread and have to rethread it, my needle constantly. And I've cut my embroidery floss off at about 3 feet. I feel like 3 feet is very workable. You won't get a ton of tangles that way, and you won't feel like you have to constantly rethread your needle with about 3 feet. Okay, so before you get started, once again, just make sure that there's no buildup of paint in any of your holes. I do have a little buildup right here, so I'm just gonna take it, I'm gonna poke that out with my felting needle here. And then I'm just gonna make sure I wipe that off with a baby wipe so I don't get brown paint anywhere else. And we're gonna get started. Now, we're not putting a knot in the end, okay? We do not knot the end. You can look at your instructions for a little bit more clarification on that, but I'm gonna walk you through it right now. So I'm going to start on this flower here. I'm just starting on either the left or right side, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to take my needle and my thread and I'm going to come up through the bottom of my disc and I'm moving up to the second hole. I'm not putting my needle through that first hole. I'm moving past that first hole, coming up through the second hole, okay? And I'm going to pull my thread all the way through till I have about an inch left at the back. And I'm just going to hold that down with my finger. Now, if you can't hold it with your finger, you can put a little dab of hot glue on there, or you can put a little piece of tape if you want. But just, you're only going to have to hold it for a couple of stitches and then it's going to stay. So I'm just going to hold it down with my finger. Okay, so now I'm going to take my needle and thread and I'm going to go back down through that first hole that I skipped. And I'm going to pull my thread all the way through till it's tight. Now you may get some tangles, but just they're really not knots. You can work them out. Just be patient and work those out. And there's my first back stitch. See that? In my first stitch. Now I'm going to bring my needle up through the third hole. See it coming up through the third hole there? And then I'm going to drop it down through the second hole. And I'm going to pull it tight again. And there you have. Now we have 2 back stitches. 2 back stitches done. Okay, so here we go. We're going up through that next empty hole that has no thread in it. And yes, you'll have to turn your work over and look for the hole all the time. I can never just poke the needle through blindly. Back down through the next hole that we worked past. Just like that. We're going right in order, okay? Now we've come to a leaf. You have 2 options. You can either work the leaf and then finish the stem, or finish the stem and go back for the leaf. For me, it makes a lot more sense just to finish the leaf and then move on to the stem, because then I don't have a lot of thread being crisscrossed at the back. Not that the back really matters, but it just makes more sense to me. So I'm going to get the center of the leaf real quick. I'm going to push my needle up to that hole there. And remember, we always want to work backwards on our thread. So that's why we go up to the next hole and we skip that hole and we go backwards with our thread, which creates a back stitch. Okay, see that? And now I'm going to do the leaf. So I'm going to come to this hole here, if I can find it. All right, up through there. And I'm going back down through that hole. You guys hear the rain? It is pouring buckets. You can hear it just like hitting the roof. It's crazy. All right, now we're gonna work our way all the way around that leaf. So I'm working up, pulling my thread, and then down. Super simple, right? Now you'll notice that we have engraved also, or scored these lines, and we're basically, it's like a dot to dot. We're showing you where your thread should be going. So you can follow those for help as well. Okay, I'm gonna move my work down so it's on top of the table so I can work it easier. And I know it's a little bit further from the camera, but I want you to, it's actually a little bit easier for me. It's hard for me to see what I'm doing when I have it so close to the camera for you. So I'm just gonna finish this leaf, but I will probably speed this up just a little bit so you guys aren't sitting through endless video. So I'm gonna try not to talk during this so that I can actually speed it up. Here we go. All right, so I got to the end of my leaf, all right? But you'll see I still have, let me get a pointer here for you a little bit longer. I still have this stitch to do here. So what I'm gonna do is I went down through this hole here. So what I'm going to do is gently come up through this hole at the end of the leaf without snagging any of my threads because I don't want to split them. All right, so I'm coming up through that hole. And then I'm gonna go down to fill in that stitch, okay? There we go. So now we got that stitch. Can you see that? All right, now I'm gonna bring my thread up through this hole and I'm gonna come back down through this stitch. And then we're back on track to finish up our leaf or our stem. Okay, back down to where I can actually see what I'm working on. So I'm going down through that hole, down here. And now my stem's back on track. And I'm gonna come up through this hole. Can you see my needle there? Up and back down. Okay, now I'm gonna finish this stem. Lower my work so I can see what I'm doing. And just keep on stitching. Okay, so you can see that I've worked my way all the way up, but I still have to make one more stitch inside that large center of this flower. It looks like a dandelion to me, so that's what I'm gonna call it. I still have to make that last stitch, and the reason I have to do that is because I'm gonna fill all of these stitches with thread, but if I don't make that last stitch, it will just look like my stem ended, and it won't look like it's connected to the flower. All right, so I like to put my stitch all the way up into the flower. All right, so there's our first stem completed. Now I've still got plenty of thread, so I'm just gonna move over to this guy here. And because I ended at the top of this guy, I'm gonna start at the top of this guy and work my way down. So for this guy, you can do a couple of different things here. You can do it just like this, where that's just all back stitching, or on this one, and I should say it's all back stitching with the same color, or this one I got fancy and I just did the stem part of it in green, and then I took and I did the I made it look more like a flower with a lavender, and I did French knots. So let's just do a couple of stitches in this guy, and I will show you how you can do this. All right, so I'm gonna start, remember you're gonna start one down. You're always gonna skip because you have to back stitch. So there's my first back stitch. Okay, I'm gonna come up to the next one down, next whole one that I have any thread through it, and back stitch. And I'm gonna go all the way down the flower or the leaf. Okay, I'm gonna lower it so I can see what I'm doing, and I'll try not to talk so I can speed up the video. Okay, that finished the center of that stem. Now you have to decide, do you want to use the same color on these sides of this, or do you want to use a different color? If you want to use the same color, all you're going to do is continue stitching. You're going to go to the right or to the left, go up through and back down. So there's your back stitch. Same thing on this side. you're going to come up and back down. There you go, see that? Now you can continue all the way up the flower just like that if you want to, or you could change your colors. That's up to you. I'm just gonna keep this the same color because I'm gonna go back in and I'm gonna add French knots to this guy, because we want you to learn French knots as well. They're so simple and they're quite fun to do actually. So I'm gonna go ahead and just finish this. Now I am gonna have to rethread my needle because I'm gonna run out of my green floss here in just a second. All right, guys, I keep losing video for some reason. It just keeps shutting off, and then whatever I had recorded disappears. So you lost, or I should say I lost me videoing me finishing this stem. But I think that you understand the concept of it. We're just up through the outside hole and then back down to the center hole all the way till you finish it. This is my last stitch of this guy. Okay, so that completes that stem. Now I'm going to move on to the stem. And once again, I'm already at the top here. So instead of dragging my thread all the way back down here to start, I'm just going to start right at the top. Now, once again, remember how I said I want my stem to go up into the flower. This is the last hole in the flower, and you can see our engraved score mark here showing you to take the stem all the way up to that hole right there. So I'm going to pull my thread up through this hole here so I can back stitch into this hole. Okay, so here we go. Our thread's coming up through this hole. And I'm back stitching all the way up to that hole there. You can see that line showing you where to go. Okay, right there. And then I'm going to grab the next hole down. And back stitch. Okay. Next hole down. Back stitch. One more, and then I'm going to do the leaf. Here's this guy here. Right. I'm gonna grab this center piece here. I'm gonna follow the engraved line back to that. And then I'm gonna come back over here and I'm gonna start the outside of the leaf. Now remember, there's no real right or wrong on where you go. Where you start, where you stop, what you do first. You just want to make sure that when you're doing it, you're not grabbing or splitting, I should say. You don't want to be splitting your threads when you go back down, when you back stitch. Okay. Now I'm going to work my way around the leaf. Work my way around the outside of the leaf there. Okay. I'll keep flipping it over so I can see it. And work my way around the outside of the leaf. Make sure you're pulling your threads tight. Don't want it all loose in the back. All right, so I made it to the back around the leaf, but don't forget, we still gotta go pick up this stitch right here. All right, so we're gonna pick that stitch up. And I'm gonna come, I wanna be able to back stitch. But I can't go back up through the hole that I just came down through because that'll just take my stitch out. So I filled that stitch in, but now I'm gonna skip down to the first open hole without a thread in it, come up through it, and then back stitch down. And now I'm back on track to back stitch the rest of this flower. I'm gonna lower my work and I'm just gonna back stitch it. I'm gonna move right on over to this flower stem here, to this stem, and I'm gonna work all the way up. And I'm going to try not to talk so I can speed it up just a little bit so you guys aren't watching a video forever. Okay, now we're getting to the top of the stem of this flower, and once again, you'll see that we don't want to just stop our stem right here. We want to go right on up to that next hole. And back stitch down, and that stem is done. Now we're gonna move over to this last one. Now in this last one, you can do the outsides all the same color, or you can do it like I did on, so example, this one is done all the same color. This one, I did the flowery part or the rounded part in a different color to make it look like flowers. And then I added French knots to the middle. You can get as fancy or as plain as you want to, or as you are comfortable with. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead, and so that I can teach you to do different things, I'm gonna just go ahead and I'm only going to do the center part of this in the green. So once again, I'm just doing back stitches, and I will stop talking so I can fast forward through this a bit. Okay, there's the end of that stem. And like I said, I was only gonna take the green through the center there so I can do the rest in the flowers. However, as I was stitching, I decided that I need to go up through these just a little bit with the green. So not a big deal. I'm just gonna come back here and I'm gonna do 2 back stitches into each one of these little bulby flowers. There's my first back stitch, and then I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna do the center and back with the green. And then I'm gonna move over to this one and do the same thing with this guy here. You see the needle coming up there, back down. This center of this guy. And down. And then I'm gonna move up to get all of these other ones. Just doing the 2 stitches to tie the stem to the leaf of the flower. And one more. More of this guy here. And down. And then its center and down. Okay, and that is it for my green. So I'm going to pull that thread out and then I'm just going to trim it off, leaving about an inch or two of thread at the back that I can bury later. Okay, so now we're gonna start on the flower that I call the dandelion flower. And you'll notice that the center of that is, the hole is much larger than the rest of the holes. Well, the holes on all of these discs, most of them are pretty much the same size, but you'll notice that a few of them are just slightly bigger. And like this hole, this one is really big. And the reason is the holes are sized according to how many times the thread has to pass through them. For this particular hole, the thread is going to pass through just as many times as there are holes around the outside of it. So we are going to, doing the back stitch still, we are going to pull our thread up through the center, and we're going to pull until we only have a couple of inches at the back that we're going to hold on to with our finger till we make a few stitches. And then we're going to drop our thread back down through one of the outside holes, the one closest to the stem. Okay, and then we're going to keep doing this all the way around. So we're going to come up through the center and we're going to back stitch down through one of the outside holes all the way around the dandelion. All right, I'm going to drop my work so that I can have better control over it and see it a little bit better. And we'll probably speed this up just a little bit. I have to continuously flip my disc over to find the hole to put the needle through. I cannot do it blindly. So don't feel bad if you constantly have to look at the back. And down. Okay, there's our first flower finished. Now I'm just going to leave a tail at the back that I can bury later and cut that off, and I'm going to change threads. Okay, so now we're going to put French knots along all of this stem. So a French knot can be kind of tricky at first until you get the hang of it, but once you get the hang of it, you're going to French knot everything. So I've already got my first French knot done, and you can see that right here. Let me get it into camera. And right there is our first French knot. So now I'm gonna come up through the next hole. Right there, you can see my needle coming up. And I gotta lower my work because I have to be able to use both of my hands. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tip my needle sideways so you can see my needle's horizontal. It's pointing that direction. I'm gonna take the working thread, that's the thread that's hanging down. I'm gonna take that working thread and I'm gonna wrap it around my needle 3 times, okay? You see that? Watch again. 1, 2, 3, okay? I'm gonna try to wrap it as close down to the circle as I can. I don't want it actually wrapped way up here because I gotta go back down and it's just all that extra thread that I'm gonna have to work through. So I'm actually gonna grab the thread just a couple of inches off of my disc and I'm gonna wrap it once, twice, 3 times around that needle. I'm gonna take the needle and I'm going to, let me see if I can pick this up and show you. I'm going to take the needle now and I'm going to go right back, holding this thread tight. I'm gonna go right back down the hole that the blue thread actually came up out of, okay? I'm holding this thread with my left hand, or you can see my thumb and my index finger. I'm holding that thread kind of tight and I'm pushing my needle back down. I'm gonna pull my needle back down while I still am holding on with my index and my thumb to that thread to make my French knot. Now, if you don't want to do French knots, you don't have to. You can leave your embroidery just the way it is. But French knots have become one of my favorite little details to add to these. However, until you learn the technique of a French knot, it can be very frustrating. So don't worry, you can clip the thread off and pull it out if it doesn't look right, or if it's not, you're not getting it at first. But you can also practice this on a scrap piece of fabric if you would like. All right, so let's do this. So we're gonna take our thread and we're gonna pull up through wherever we want the French knot to go. For me, it's going to be this hole here where I missed it. And I have new thread started, so I have to secure my thread at the back. Okay, now we're going to take our needle and we're going to point it away from our work. So it's laying horizontal, so like the horizon, right? It's not vertical, it's horizontal. We're going to take our thread that's coming up out of our wood disc. I'm gonna pull my thread a little bit because it's a starter thread. We're gonna take that thread and we're gonna wrap it around our needle 3 times. So there's 1, 2, 3, okay? Keep a hold on this thread over here that you just wrapped. Hold on to it with your index and your thumb. And then you're gonna take your needle and you're gonna go right back down through the hole that you came up in. Oops, I'm picking up and I lost my thread. Okay, so you're gonna go right back down the hole that you came up, all the while holding on to this thread with your thumb and your index finger. You want to pull tight on that, not too tight, but tight. Now I'm going to push my needle back down through that hole, keeping that thread tight because that's holding the wraps around the needle. I'm going to pull my needle back down through that hole. I'm still holding tight onto this thread here. And I'm going to pull my needle all the way through. I've got a long line of thread because it's brand new. And then once you get, you saw that I just let go right there. It's because I only had just a little bit of thread left. And so once you get there, you can let go and you'll see my French knot. Now don't pull the thread super tight from the back of the disc, okay? So the thread that you just pushed down to the back of the disc, this thread here, you don't want to pull that super tight because you'll obliterate your knot. But you just want to pull it down till it kind of stops with the gentle tug. All right, let's do that again. Gotta flip it over so I can see where I'm going. Okay, and then let me, hold on, give me a second here. Let me trim off my starter thread. Okay, let's do it again. So my needle's coming up through the hole where I want the French knot. Okay, now I'm gonna take that thread that's up. I'm gonna point my needle sideways horizontally away from my work. I'm gonna wrap that thread that's up through the disc around my needle 3 times. Okay, you see that? 3 times around the needle. And now I'm gonna take that needle head, I'm still holding this thread tight here. I'm gonna take the head of that needle and go back down through the hole where I came up. You see what's going on here? That down through that hole. I'm holding this thread tight so I don't lose my wraps. And I'm gonna pull the needle down through the back. I'm still holding on, but now I'm got to the point where I've reached my fingers and I've kind of got to let go. So I'm letting go. And now I'm not pulling very tight here because I don't want to lose the knot that I just made. But there's the knot that I just made. That one right there. All right, now let's do it again. Up through the top of this hole, right there. Pull it all the way through. Point your needle away from your work. Grab this thread that's closest to the disc. Wrap it around your needle 3 times. Take the needle, go back down through the hole you just came up. Hold that thread tight still, don't let go. Push the needle down through that hole. Give it a little tug and pull your thread till you're running out, then you can let go. And then just a little snug, not too tight because you want to keep your knot. All right, now we're gonna repeat that all the way down this side of the flower where you want the French knot. I'm gonna leave the camera going. I'm not gonna talk though, and I'll probably speed it up just a bit. And then we're gonna learn how to do these flowers. So as a recap, needle up through, take your thread, hold on to it, take your needle, lay it sideways, wrap your thread around it 3 times, hold that thread tight, go back down through the hole, keep holding that thread tight, pull your needle down, keep on holding. You can see my thumb has not released yet. And there, I'm just going to gently let my thumb off, and there's my French knot. All right, so the more you do of these, the better you'll get. You can see that that knot there is kind of big and doesn't look even, but now this row here, I've done all at the same time, and they were all very successful, and I got into my groove, and they all look the same. Okay, now we are going to move on to some more back stitching, and that is going to be done on this flower head here. So I'm going to trim off the thread of my blue, and I'm going to grab some of my purple, and I'm going to thread my needle with a length of my purple. Now I'm going to do the flower head. And I'm gonna do the petals of the flower. I'm gonna save the flower head for the second part for last. And it does not matter where you start. You're just gonna start anywhere. So remember, you always want to skip the hole that you want to start on. So I'm gonna hold my thread at the back for a couple of stitches, and I'm gonna drop down into that hole that I skipped. Pull my thread tight, and then I'm gonna go on to the next hole, and I'm going to pull my thread through and then back stitch into that hole. Okay, so you can see I have my first 2 stitches there. Purple's kind of hard to see against the wood. Up through the next hole. And drop down. Remember, you're following the engraved lines, just like doing a dot to dot. Okay, so this is the first petal done. Okay, you see that first petal is done. Now I'm going to move over to the second petal, but you will notice that I did not do a stitch across here because that's the head of the flower, and I'm going to do that in a different color. And I don't feel like I really need to make a stitch across here in the purple because I really want the head of the flower to stand out a little bit more because it's so much smaller. So I'm not going to stitch right there in purple. I'm just going to move over to this guy here, the next petal. And I know I'm at the top of the petal at the back of my work, but I am going to just bring my thread down to the bottom of the petal. You can see I'm going to skip that first hole, and I'm going to bring my needle up through the second so I can back stitch down into that hole there. Okay. All right, so I know I'm at the top of this petal at the back of my work, but I'm still going to bring my thread down so I can start right here. Now, if you pay attention to where your engraved lines are, you can see that I still need to make this stitch right here. So I'm going to bring my needle up through that second hole down. Okay, so my needle's coming up through that second hole. And then I'm going to drop my needle down to that hole above it. So I'm connecting those 2 petals. Let's see, sorry guys. See that? I'm connecting those 2 petals. Okay, so then I'm gonna come in the next hole down. And then I'm gonna drop my thread down into the one above it. And I'm going to continue all the way around, all the way up to the top right here. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drop down to this hole here and go up to that hole. All right, so let's come back in just a second. Okay, so this petal's done. I went to the top, and now I'm going to do the next petal. I'm going to bring my needle down to this first open hole. Let me show you. Okay, so let me see if I can pull the threads aside so you can see. All right, so you can see my needle coming up there. And then I'm gonna drop it down into the top one. And then that connects those two petals together. Okay, so now we're gonna keep on going. We're gonna come up through this hole here. And then drop down here. All right, now we're gonna complete this petal. Petal is complete. Now we're gonna move on to the last one. And just like every other one, we're gonna come down and grab, the first one that needs to be tied in, which is this hole here. And then we're gonna drop down into the hole above it. Okay. Just remember to follow the engraved lines, just like a dot to dot, and you'll be fine. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and finish the stitching. Okay, so our petals are finished on the purple. And now we're going to do the head of the flower. And the same thing, we're just gonna do a back stitch. I've threaded my yellow embroidery floss, and I'm just going to, it doesn't matter where you start, just pick a hole, come up through it, and remember you're gonna go drop back down to the one behind it. And then you're just gonna do this all the way around this flower. Just back stitching all the way around. It's hard for me to keep it in the camera because I have to pull my work up so I can see where I'm going. I'm sorry, guys. All right, this is our last stitch for the yellow here. And I'm just gonna take a couple of quick tucks on the back with my yellow thread and trim it off. Okay, and there is my yellow head of my flower. All right, now we're gonna move on to this guy, and we're gonna do the same thing. This is all back stitching all the way around, just like this purple one. All right, just like that purple one. Okay, just remember to follow the engraved lines so you hook all your petals together. And we'll come back as soon as we're done with this flower. Okay, we're back and I have completed this last stitch flower here. And now we're going to move on to this last flower with the little bulbs that we are going to do in a different thread color. I'm going to do mine pink because the only thing I've done in pink is my little dandelion there. And so I am going to do these in my pink thread. Now, we are just going to backstitch on these guys. So once again, it is the same concept as before. Just a backstitch through each of the, or around each of the little bulbs. But when I'm all done with all of my backstitching, I am going to come and put little French knots and at each of these little stems here. Okay, and you can actually add French knots wherever you want to add them. You could put French knots through the whole entire thing if you want, but that is up to you. So here we go on that. So once again, we're just going to skip the first hole that we need to go into, which in this case is going to be the hole right down here where that's the stitch into the bulb part ends. So I'm going to grab the first open hole with no thread in it, and I'm going to pull up, and then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go down into that hole there. Okay, can you see the pink there? If I get too close, it gets blurry, so. All right, so then we're gonna pick up and come through the next open hole. And we're going to go back down. And we're going to work our way all the way around this guy. Oops. Okay, so now I've got that one last stitch to complete here, so I tie this whole bulb together. And what I need to do is I need to come up through the stitch down here. But when I come up through it, I need to be careful because there's already 3 threads that are going through that hole. And so this is going to make a 4th one. I need to make sure that I'm not splitting my threads apart, and so they don't look like I just ran a piece of pink thread right through the middle of the green. Okay, does that make sense? So let me see if I can get this in the camera view a little bit better. See how I did that? I did not split. I know it's a little blurry when I'm so close like that, but I really want you to be able to see. See, I did not split those threads. I was very careful about where I went in. All right, now we're going to just finish all the remaining 4 that we have in that same fashion, and we'll be back in a second to do the finishing details of the French knots. Okay, we have finished now all the little bulbs on this last flower, and so now we get to add the detail of the French knots. Now I'm going to put a French knot inside every single one of these 5 little bulbs at the tip of where the thread comes up into the bulb and ends. So at every one of these knot spots here, these holes here, okay? And I'm going to use my yellow thread, and I already have my needle threaded. So I am going to just come up through the first hole, and I gotta pull my thread out because I just started. All right, so now I'm going to, let's practice French knots once again. I'm going to grab the thread with my thumb and my index finger, and I'm gonna lay my needle across my work, and then I'm gonna wrap the thread around the needle 3 times, and I'm gonna go back down into the hole, making sure I'm pulling this thread tight right here. All right, I gotta lift my work up, so it might lose the camera for a second. And I'm just gonna hold that thread with my thumb while I pull my needle through, and you'll see I'm still holding on to that thread with my thumb because I don't want to let go until I absolutely have to. And so now I can't pull any more thread because my thumb is holding it, and at this point I have to release my thumb. I'm still just going to pull nice and slow and not very tight until that thread tightens onto the knot that it has just made. Okay, now I'm going to come up through the next one, and we're going to do the same thing all over again. My needle up. I have to set my work down. I'm going to grab that with my index and my thumb. I'm going to wrap the thread around my needle 3 times. Still holding that tight. I'm going to push my needle down through. Gotta pick it up so I can do it. Okay, so now we're going to do the next one. We're going to come up through the hole with our needle. We're gonna grab that thread with our thumb and index finger, and we're going to wrap it around our needle 3 times. And then still holding very tight, we're gonna push that needle back down to that hole. We're not gonna release the tension. We're gonna still hold the tension on this thumb and index finger. We're gonna push that needle down, very slowly pull the thread through until we can't pull anymore because we're holding onto it with our thumb and index. And that point, we're gonna let go and just pull lightly, right? Let's do this again. Right, thumb and index finger. And here's the needle. We're gonna wrap once, twice, 3 times, pull very tight, push your needle back down through the hole, hold on tight until you run out of thread and have to let go. Sorry, guys. All right, and my last one. Up through the center. Grab this thread, my needle, sideways. I'm gonna wrap the thread around 3 times. Pull very tight, hold on to that, push your needle back down through the same hole, keep your hold on that thread until you can't hold on to it anymore, and gently let go and pull through. And there are my 5 French knots. And now I'm going to add a French knot to the middle of the dandelion. Now you could go all the way around the outside of the dandelion if you wanted to with French knots, but I'm just gonna put one in the middle. And I am going to just secure my thread on the back from this yellow and trim it off. And let's see, what color? Let's do this fuchsia color or salmon color. Got just a little bit of salmon color left over, strung on my needle. I'm going to come up through the center of that dandelion where all of those threads came together. I'm going to come up through the center of that dandelion where all of those threads came together, and I'm going to grab that thread with my index and my thumb, and I'm going to lay my needle sideways, and I'm going to wrap. I'm going to wrap this 5 times, and then I'm going to hold on tight and go back down through the center, and I'm going to pull that through and only let go when I absolutely have to, and pull. Now this hole is quite big through there, so that's why I wanted to go 5 times. And I'm not gonna pull super tight, because if I pull super tight, I might end up pulling it right on through. So there's the center of that one. And a cute little French knot. Love those French knots. And I'm going to trim my thread. Now at the back of your work, you're gonna have all these little threads, so you can push them down with glue, hot glue, or if you can grab them and tie them together, you can do that. Or you can take your needle and thread, or your needle, and you can push it through, thread the needle, and then pull the thread all the way through just to secure it a couple of times. I don't really worry about it because usually I was covering those ends of the threads as I was stitching. So I'm generally just going to trim them and leave them. However, if they feel a little loose in the front, I might pull them to the back a little tighter and then go ahead and put a dab of hot glue there to hold them into place. Now you can add French knots wherever you want to add French knots for accent and detail. Like in the centers of these little leaves right here, you could add a French knot there with the green thread or whatever color thread you wanted to. If you wanted to get a different color in there, you absolutely could do that. Otherwise, your work is done and you'll just want to display it on your little easel. My camera is pointing down, so I don't really have the ability to set this up on the easel and show it to you. You wouldn't be able to see it. But now when you do your letter, it is done the same exact way. You're just doing a back stitch in that letter. It is no different than every flower that you've done on this work. So don't be dismayed by it. It's done the exact same way. You're just going to back stitch. Just pick a hole, come up through it, and then work backwards. Okay? All the way around your letter. Your letter is actually probably pretty easy, just a little bit longer. I do French knots in these real quick. See that? What a difference it makes, huh? French knots, love them. Once you learn how to do them, you will love them as well. Just remember to hold that thread in your thumb and index finger and then wrap it around your needle. Just keep a nice tight hold on it until you run out of thread and you have to let go. Just like that. All right, you guys, that is it for this tutorial. I know that this tutorial was super long, but this was a pretty detailed and quite a different project to learn how to do. So the video had to be really long to teach you all of this, but I really hope that you enjoy these. And we actually have designed several more of these. We'll be adding them to the website. So if this was something that you really enjoyed doing, you'll be able to buy these discs. We will provide the disc and the option of thread because we have so much in stock. But if you want to choose your own thread, we will offer just the discs alone as well. All right. We have a wonderful wreath design. We have states, and we have the Michigan. We're working on more. All right, thanks guys. We hope you really enjoyed this and learned something new. Maybe stepped outside your comfort zone a little bit. Take care.